Let's talk about villains. I want to talk about what I think makes a good villain, because I feel like there's different ways to make a good villain, and I just kind of want to talk about it as well as give examples. And again, I should note, these are just my opinions. Obviously, every story has different needs and different circumstances. In my opinion, there are two kinds of villains. Two kinds of good villains, I should say. Spectacle villains, complex villains. And if you have no other takeaway from this video, it should be to believe that no matter what, your villain needs to be entertaining. Spectacle villains aren't necessarily the most complex villains out there, but they're still an entertaining watch. I'm just gonna give a couple examples of this. Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad has the Salamanca twins. A show that has many complex villains and villainous protagonists. The Salamanca twins aren't exactly complex at all. I mean, yeah, they have some standards and personalities in the sense that, they value family, they have respect for whatever this death thing is. I don't know what that was about. But the key strength for the Salamanca twins' appeal is the fact that they are hitmen. Seriously, the fact that they're twins that have this synergy, twinergy if you will. I'm a twin, so I can make a joke like that. And the way that they're just in sync with each other all the time. The way that, they are very good at their jobs as well. Again, they're not the most complex villains out there, but they are still an entertaining sight. And some of the most intense scenes in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul come from them as a result. Another example of a spectacle villain would be Darth Maul from Star Wars. Now, I recognize that the Clone Wars show did give him a little bit more of a character, but he's still not exactly the most complex thing. Yeah, he's kind of sort of a victim of the Sith's machinations, but they don't really focus on this at all. And there's nothing that he does in the Clone Wars show that doesn't ultimately boil down to, I'm a villain. But again, look at Darth Maul, especially if we're talking about how he appears in Phantom Menace. He has this double-bladed lightsaber. He has this red and black paint going on with the horns. He is an entertaining presence, absolutely, even though he only appears in 3 or 4 scenes. And again, that's just 2 examples. Now there's also a subcategory of spectacle villains where it's a slightly different thing. I call them hate sinks, taking this from the TV tropes page. These characters are still kind of over the top, but in a different way. Basically, these are characters that you love to hate. Utterly repugnant bastards to the core, and they fully commit to that with how they portray the character. There are several characters in Game of Thrones that fit this bill. I'm not going to pretend like I know them too well because I haven't watched Game of Thrones, but I'm sure Game of Thrones fans, you can think of several characters. If you're a Warhammer 40k fan, you probably know about Erebus. This fucking guy. Again, they're not exactly the most interesting from a design standpoint or from a vibe standpoint, but still entertaining because they're hate sinks, because they're just that detestable that you love to hate them. So now let's get to the second category, complex villains, which again is pretty straightforward. There's a lot of idiosyncrasies of what drives them. They have some redeeming values. Sometimes you may even agree with what they're doing. Again, ultimately they're still villains, and I feel like they need to be treated as such. Sadly enough, this is a hot take, but I think that villains, even complex ones, are still villains. Even tragic villains are still villains. You know what I mean? It's all about what they do, ultimately, as a result. Good examples of complex villains, again, going with the Breaking Bad example, Gustavo Fring. Here is a guy that ultimately wants wealth and power and is a drug kingpin. He comes across as a businessman, someone who donates to charities, and the fact that he has enemies in the cartel, and some of these are very personal. A lot of well-meaning extremists can kind of fit the bill, so Ra's al Ghul, or Ra's al Ghul, however you want to pronounce it, Magneto. These are villains that, at their worst are absolutely villainous to the core, but at their best they have some standards and they have some limits. And sometimes even the causes they have might be noble. Those villains are, of course, harder to write, but it's when you can pull it off successfully, the results are great. Again, these are not hard categories. You can have villains that kind of fit a little bit of both. If nothing else, again, the takeaway you should have for this is make sure your villain is entertaining. If your villain's not entertaining, your story's going to be hamstrung as a result. Whether the visually interesting, complex, or somewhere in the middle, make sure your villain is entertaining, because after all, a hero is only as good as their villain.